Chapter 17. The evening passed quickly. Once the girls showed up, the new house was a beehive of activity. AJ and Blaine put up the microwave, and Melody was glad to see that for once they weren't at each other's throats. The drive and the required energy level of the exertion for the day were getting to her. Just before the pizza arrived, she went into the bathroom with 4 aspirins in her hand. 3 no longer made a dent in the headache. She downed them with a large gulp of water. When she came up for air, her gaze snagged on her own reflection. Her hair was getting much worse. She picked at it, and even the light touch was enough to break off a few more strands. With a frustrated sigh, she pitched them in the trash. Knowing there was nothing she could do about it now, she shut the lights off and went back to join the others. The pizza had arrived, and she was so hungry, just the smell of it made her sick. Her throat started closing with every whiff, and throwing up was becoming a real possibility. However, she knew enough to know AJ would suspect something if she said she didn't feel well. Somehow, she had to get through dinner, eating enough to not let them know, but not so much that it made her sick. However, how she would ever do that was beyond her. "I got breadsticks," Jeff called over the 4 scavengers ripping the pizza apart at the table. "Ah, this is so good. I feel like I haven't eaten in a month," Eve said, biting into a piece of supreme dripping with cheese. Melody stuck her fingers in the back pocket of her jeans and fought the nausea even as she tried not to watch. They can do that. Look at them. Eating like it doesn't even matter. It must be nice. Then, her worst nightmare. Blaine stepped over to her, a plate of pepperoni pizza in hand. "It's really good, Mel. Do you want me to get you a piece?" "Oh, no, that's all right." Even the words were shaky. I got something on the drive over." Eve's glance raked over her nerves. "But I thought you were behind us the whole way. Lisa kept checking the mirror to make sure we hadn't lost you." How to breathe through the lies, Melody had no idea. "Oh, yeah, well, I saved some of my sandwich from earlier. I ate it in the car." Blaine didn't believe her. His look said that much. "Come on, Mel," AJ said, and his voice sounded strained. "At least have a breadstick." The fact that everyone was now looking at her drove right through her. "Okay, fine, a breadstick." However, it was the one thing she knew. If you ever lose your willpower for one moment, you've lost the battle. She accepted the breadstick from AJ and picked a small piece off just to show everybody that there was nothing to see here. They could move on with their lives. Buttered and sprinkled with garlic, the breadstick made everything in her want to reverse course. Each bite was an all-out battle to get it down. But at least they were all talking again, to each other and not to her. However, she felt every glance Blaine sent her way. She sent a weak smile his direction, but it was clear he wasn't buying it. With everything in her, she wanted to find a way to alter the conversation so that he wasn't focused on what she wasn't eating. "Oh, you know, Eve, I was going to ask you." Eve's attention swung to her, and Melody swallowed hard. I was wondering what kind of shampoo you use. I mean, your hair always looks so great, and mine is just getting eaten by the sun this summer." "Oh, it's called Health and Shine. You can get it from any beauty supply place." "Really?" Melody put a tiny piece of breadstick in her mouth. "You don't get it from Harmon's?" Eve shook her head. "Theirs is way too expensive, and not nearly as good." A breath, and Melody smiled. "Health and Shine. I'll have to try that." When it was time to go, Blaine shepherded his bunch to the door. "Good luck getting everything set up." "Hey, thanks for coming," Jeff said, clapping Blaine on the back. "We really appreciate it." "Yeah, I would have never gotten the other place vacuumed without you," Lisa said. "You were a lifesaver." Beside him, Melody smiled. "Glad we could help. Well, we'd better get on the road. Blaine's got school in the morning." When he turned, Blaine found AJ standing there. Shaking hands, a serious message passed between them. Then AJ stepped past him to Melody and gave her a hug that dragged Blaine's gaze to the ground. A moment, and another, And then AJ stepped back, his gaze holding on Melody, his hands still on her arms. "You take care, okay?" She smiled and nodded. "I will." And then they extracted themselves from the evening. Blaine made sure to hold her hand down the steps and out to the car where he helped Dylan get in, while Melody got herself in on the other side. Blaine got in, praying for the right words like he'd never prayed before. He pulled onto the street and pushed the play button on the CD player. With any luck, Dylan would fall asleep quickly. Blaine looked in the rearview mirror. "Just lay your head down, buddy. It's going to be a while." The little eyelids were already drooping as the child nodded. He curled up on the seat, and Blaine waited 2 more songs before deciding the time had come. "That preacher sure had some interesting things to say this morning, huh?" he said with a glance her direction. She looked exhausted as she lay back on the headrest. "Man, that seems like eons ago." He smiled over at her. "But it was really good, didn't you think? Especially the part about things that keep you from feeling love." Nodding, she simply let her head fall to the side so she could watch him. He felt it, the sweet, soft pride of her love of him. With everything in him, Blaine didn't want to destroy that, although he was pretty sure his next words would. He reached over and turned the music down. "Listen, Mel, I can't lie to you anymore. I found the pills the other day when I was looking for your keys." The admission came out with a whoosh, and after a blink, her gaze fell from his face. He looked over at her. "I wasn't looking for them. I found them by accident." Only silence came from her side, and he reached for her hand, which gave nothing of a response. "Come on. You're smarter than this. You've got to know this isn't healthy. I mean, I know it isn't easy in this world with all the models and cover girls, but you've got to know that you're really beautiful just like you are." If it was possible, she became even quieter, seeming to shrink completely to her side. "Look, I don't know who you're trying to impress doing this, but you're scaring me, okay? And AJ's not too thrilled about it either." "AJ?" The name snapped her out of her stupor. "What does he have to do with this?" "Mel." Blaine looked over at her. "Look, I had to find out if this was something I should be worried about or not." "You talked to AJ about me?" Horror flashed through each word. "What gives you the right to do something like that?" He could feel his grip on the relationship slipping. "I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe he could tell me what to say and how to say it." "So this was AJ's idea?" "Yeah. Well, no. I mean, it was both of our ideas. We just thought someone needed to say something. Come on, Mel, you've got to see how unhealthy this is. Not eating anything and taking pills on top of it. That can't be good for you." This time, when she retreated to her side, her demeanor was less sullen and more angry. She wrapped her arms around her middle and stared out into the night beyond. "I'm not saying I don't understand," he continued, flailing for something that she would hear and accept. "I do, but this isn't the way to go about it." She pushed her fingers through her hair. "I don't know what business it is of yours what I do or don't do. It's my body." "Come on, Mel. You're the one who said we need to start making decisions together, remember? I don't want to see you sick." "I'm not sick." "Then what's the deal with your hair coming out every time you touch it? And Dylan says you've been having headaches." She threw her hands in the air. "Oh, great. Now you're grilling Dylan about this? Who else did you tell? Eve? Lisa? The Mormon Tabernacle Choir?" Defensiveness crept into him. "No, I didn't tell them, but I would if I thought it would help." Her mouth fell open as she stared at him. Then she shook her head, turned her gaze out her window, and put her knuckles to her mouth. "Melody, come on. Don't be mad. You mean the world to me. You've got to know that." She spun. "Then lay off, okay? You don't know what it's like. You say you do, but you don't. You don't know what it's like to be made fun of, to be called baby fat and thunder thighs. You don't know what it's like to look in the mirror and hate everything about yourself. You don't know what it's like to want one slice of pizza but to know you can't have it because just looking at it will make you gain 5 pounds. You don't know what it's like to pass up every good thing you want to eat for a week and only lose maybe 1 pound, if you lose anything, or to eat salad for a week and gain weight. She took a breath, but only a small one. And don't tell me you do, because you don't. You don't know what it's like, and you never will. Blaine sat, absorbing how deeply frustrated she was. He understood that, because he was frustrated too. You're right, I don't know what that's like, but I do know what it's like to watch someone you love hurting themselves and knowing there's nothing you can do about it. He kept his gaze on the road only because there was no way he could look at her when he went into this deep, dark hole. You know, I've watched my mother for 10 years, drinking, taking drugs, and being with abusive guys who have beaten her senseless on more than one occasion. I've watched, and I've done everything I can think of to make her stop. I wish so bad I could do something to make her stop, to make her see what she's doing to herself. But she won't stop, because she can't, even if she wanted to anymore. She can't. That's different. I'm not on drugs. What do you call those pills in your purse? The silent anger was back. Mel, look, I'm not trying to lecture you, but you need to understand that I don't want to be with you because you've lost some weight or because you wear a certain size. I want to be with you because of you. I love you because of you. I love being around you. I love who I am when I'm with you. But watching you do this to yourself is killing me, and I don't know how to stop it other than saying, please stop. Please. Barely, but he heard her breathing. He glanced at her. I didn't say anything before because I didn't want to risk losing what we've got. But then, when I talked to AJ today, I knew I couldn't not say anything anymore. You're too important to me. I don't want to lose you. I can't stand to think of my life without you. For a second, nothing. He drove, feeling helpless. Then he heard the sniffle. When he looked over, she was crying. Really? Wishing he could take her in his arms at that moment, he nodded. Really? I love you so much, Melody. You've got to know that. And then, because the tears began sliding down her face for real, he pulled off the interstate and onto a side street. Instantly, she sat up. Why are we stopping? Blaine put the car in park and turned to gather her into his arms. Because it's real hard to do this, going 80. The closer she got to him, the closer he wanted her to be. When she was encircled in his arms, he tightened his grip. I love you, Mel. I really do. I love you so much, and I hope you know that. Her gaze came up to his, and she nodded with a soft smile. There was no reason in the world not to, and Blaine gave in to the tug of her spirit on his. Softly, he dipped his head toward hers, and when their lips touched, he could have sworn he heard the angels singing. For Melody, the trip home could have lasted forever, and she would not have complained. However, in no time they were pulling up to the curb at her house. As strange as it sounded, she felt different for the journey. She was still a little embarrassed that her hopeless attempts at losing weight had been so obvious, but at least he hadn't dumped her because she wasn't perfect. Not that it couldn't happen, but for tonight, it hadn't. He put the car in park, sat for a second, and then turned to her. I know you were mad about what I said before. I'm not mad. You're not? She shook her head. Embarrassed? Yes. Mad? No. Gently she reached across the seat to cradle his face with her hand. How could I be mad at this face? His smile was amused, and then shy. I bet you say that to all the guys. She laughed. Yeah, all those wonderful, gorgeous guys who are just lined up at my doorstep. The smile fell as he gazed into her eyes. They should be. Gratefulness for his life being in hers drifted through her. I love you. Not half as much as I love you. He reached for her, and after a tender kiss, she turned to lean into him. It was so peaceful to just relax there, completely protected and loved. She hugged his arm to her tighter, shook her head, and let out a breath. Can this really be for real? His lips brushed the top of her hair. I sure hope so. For 4 days, Blaine had been searching the for rent section of the newspaper. He was busy thinking through the ones that sounded promising when he turned onto his street on Thursday night. Dylan, thanks to a full day of roller skating in the park with Melody, was asleep in the seat next to him. He looked down at the child and smiled. He really was a wonderful kid. In the next heartbeat, as Blaine's gaze returned to the street, the flashing blue and red lights punctuating the night around him drove a knife of indescribable dread through his heart. Simultaneously accelerating and careening backward away from it all, he fought to judge in his head which house they were hovering around. He crept up the street closer and closer until he was almost on top of the house with all the lights. His house. Their house. An ambulance stood off to the side. Horror arched through him. It took everything in him to get his hands to stop shaking enough to get the car into park and the window down. He reached out and opened the door from the outside latch. He nearly fell into the street when the door gave way. Stumbling and numb, he shut the door as quietly as possible and then raced up the front walk. He felt the curious stares of the neighbors from behind their curtains. They knew. They all did. And so did he. At the door, he met up with a burly police officer who stepped into his path. "Crime scene, son. You can't go in there." Blaine struggled to peer over the man's shoulder to get closer, to understand what was going on. "My mom." "You live here?" Yes, sir." Still, he couldn't get a good look inside. What was going on? Why wouldn't they let him get to her? Is she okay?" "Gunshot victim, female, deceased, possibly drug-related," a nearby policeman said into the radio on his shoulder. "Ambulance on scene will transport the body to coroner's office." The words spun through Blaine's fear and shell-shocked mind. Deceased? What? No! Commotion at the door yanked their gazes that direction as 2 paramedics descended the steps with a gurney between them. No rational thoughts remained as Blaine pushed past the officer to get to the gurney. However, the sheet covered all of the figure underneath, even the face. The steel contraption beneath was as cold as the sheet lying on it, and sanity jerked away from him. "No! Mom! Mom!" The numbness in him crumpled into a sea of heartache and horror. "No! Mom! No! What happened? What happened to her?" Wild-eyed, he grabbed for the figure on the gurney even as a policeman held him back, and with no other options, he looked at the EMTs for some explanation. "Tell me what happened. What happened to her?" "Blaine?" His own name pierced through the hysterical disbelief swirling inside him. He blinked hard, trying to get that face in the right slot. "AJ?" The shock took over then, and the fight left him as the 2 of them stood there on the front walk of the house he had done absolutely everything to hide from every person who knew him. He had to get something out, ask some question, make some sense of something. What happened? What happened to her, AJ?" AJ looked at him, compassion and sadness flowing through his gaze. "I'm sorry. You're going to have to ask them." He nodded to the police officer now standing behind them. "We've got to move," the other EMT said. And, with a push of the cold metal, they headed for the ambulance, leaving Blaine swaying and alone on the sidewalk. "No! Oh, please! Oh, please, no!" He raked his fingers up through his hair, fighting to make some sense of what was happening even as the tears flooded his vision. The swinging of the red and blue lights around and around the scene only served to scramble his mind even further. Pushing all of that back, he forced himself to hold it together as he turned back for the officer. I need to know what happened." He could hardly string the words together. "Please, sir, that was my mother. What happened to her? Please." The officer consulted his notes. The victim was your mother? What? Yeah. Yeah. Blaine ran his fingers through his hair again, fighting the waves of sorrow and guilt. She was here. I was working. Okay, then we're going to need a statement, the officer said. Where were you at approximately 9:15 this evening? 9:15? The events began to swirl around him. How could this be happening? Not this. She didn't deserve this. He knew it was bad, but this? How could it have gotten this bad? Sir, the officer said, lancing through the questions. Oh. Blaine blinked slowly, trying to force his mind to think something other than questions. I was at work at Harmon's at the West Side Mall. I got off work at 9:30, and then I went to my friend's house to pick up. His mind slid through the thought, Dylan! Without more than that, he turned and ran back for the car. Sir, the officer called. He spoke quickly into the radio on his shoulder as he followed Blaine. Sir? Skidding to a stop at the car, Blaine gazed in, feeling the entire world drop onto his shoulders. This was it, the moment he had hoped would never actually come. He was now totally and completely responsible for this child. Unbelievably, Dylan was still asleep in the passenger seat, and Blaine knew he would remember the ghostly blue and white lights illuminating his brother's fragile face forever. Sir, the officer was now beside him. He followed Blaine's hollow, terrified gaze. Who's the boy? My brother. Had there been anyone to catch him, he would have collapsed. However, there wasn't, so instead he leaned forward onto the car. He felt like throwing up. How could she? How could she what, son? Shaking his head in anger and hurt, Blaine knew there was no reason to lie anymore. Slowly, he turned. Emptiness swallowed him up. There was nothing left, no reason to protect her anymore, no reason to cover for her. And with that thought, the whole story came tumbling out. Melody stood in the bathroom. All day it had been much harder to eat than she remembered. Every time she looked at food, reverse thrusters kicked into gear. She tried to eat an apple, but only got halfway through it before she thought she would be sick. For lunch, she ate soup, which wasn't much better than the apple. As she stood there looking at the silver-lined package of pills in her hand, it felt like standing on a thin wire dangling over a deep canyon. Would giving up her weight loss attempts only make her even more miserable? She still remembered how lethargic and horrible she'd felt with the weight, but the truth was, she didn't feel any better now. All she'd really done was traded one miserable for another. Sure, her clothes fit better, but her hair was a wreck, as was her skin. She couldn't be sure, but she thought she didn't smell like she used to either. Standing there, holding the little silver packet of pills, her thoughts tracked back to Blaine. I'm not on drugs. What do you call the pills in your purse? Her gaze slid up to her reflection, and there was a hollowness in her eyes, a sick emptiness she didn't remember being there before. Maybe Blaine was right. Maybe this whole diet thing was a mistake. And if she wasn't addicted, then why was it so hard to just throw these things in the trash? She looked at them, feeling their tug on her soul. You'll never be able to do it alone. If you quit now, you'll never look like the other girls. The battle in her spirit crescendoed to a deafening cacophony. Tears came to her eyes. She wanted so badly to be like everyone else, like the Eves and the Lanas of the world. Then her thoughts traced back over the sound of Eve's sad voice in the kitchen. Beautiful, thin, lovely Eve. Obviously there was something about her life that wasn't perfect. Maybe more than one something. Melody looked up at herself once more. Lay it down at the cross. Lay down what is keeping you from my love. Put your burden down and walk away from it. Closing her eyes even as her hand shook, she held out the packet over the trash. This is it, God. I'm laying it down. I'm laying my burden with my weight down. Her fingers opened, and the package fell in a spiraling arc right into the garbage. However, far from relief, utter terror ripped through her. What had she done? She couldn't do this on her own. She had tried, and it hadn't worked. How would she ever be able to keep the weight off? How would she ever— Melody? She sniffed and wiped the dampness from her cheeks. Yeah, Mom? AJ's on the phone, sweetheart. Oh, okay, coming. She swiped at her eyes again, trying to get them to look less puffy and sad. Then she turned, brushed off the light, and ran to get the phone. As she headed down the stairs, she knew what this call would be about. Him badgering her about the pills. She'd heard it all before, and nothing in her wanted to hear it again, especially now. She still couldn't believe Blaine had talked to AJ about it. That still seemed so strange. She didn't even think they liked each other. At the phone, she took a deep breath, prepared to tell AJ just what she thought of him meddling in her life again. Hello? Mel. Something about the shaky way he said her name went straight into her like a knife. Worry plunged on her. Yeah? Listen, I can't talk long, but something bad just happened at Blaine's place. I think you need to call him right now. What? Why? What happened? I can't tell you any details, but call him, okay? Okay. Dylan was still asleep. Blaine had just finished giving his statement to the police. There was now a warrant out for Dave's arrest, for all the good that would do. The man was a menace and a chameleon. He had slipped out of more than one noose in his lifetime, and this one would surely be no different. The understanding that he had to get Dylan far away from the horror of this place sank into Blaine. Sir, an officer said, striding up, there's a phone call inside the house. The first officer looked at Blaine. Nothing in Blaine wanted to go back in that house. Nothing. But it would have to be done sooner or later, and sooner had showed up a lot sooner than he would have ever thought possible. Finally, Blaine nodded. Will you watch Dylan? With a blink, the officer consented. Trying not to think, which really wasn't terribly hard, Blaine followed the younger officer down the walk and up the steps. Steeling his nerves, he stepped into the kitchen. A sweep, and the thought that nothing seemed that out of the ordinary went through him. Then his gaze snagged on the living room, riveting there with sickening resolve. He closed his eyes lest he see too much, yet he already had. Fighting to breathe, he went over by the kitchen wall, put his back to everything else, and picked up the phone. This is Blaine. Blaine? What's going on? Are you okay? Is Dylan okay? What happened? Where are you? The center of him started shaking uncontrollably. I'm fine. Dylan's okay. What happened? How could he say those words? They didn't even seem real. He was shaking so badly, he thought he might start crying right there. Can we come back to your house tonight? We can't stay here. Blaine, why not? What happened? My mom is dead. For Melody, there was simply no way to tell what to expect as she stood at her front door waiting for them. She tried to stop shaking. It didn't work. Her arms were wrapped around herself, trying to ward off the questions and the thoughts, horrible thoughts that wouldn't stop no matter how hard she tried to make them. When the little green Toyota pulled up to the curb outside, she yanked the door open and rushed out, oblivious to the seeping chill of the night air. She got to him just as he got out of the car, and without words, she gathered him into her arms. He buried his head onto her shoulder and grabbed onto her like a man drowning. I'm so sorry, she whispered again and again, because she knew nothing else to say. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? He didn't say anything, didn't even seem to be breathing. Oh, dear Lord, how could this happen? She asked, knowing just enough to know they'd been heading for this very wall for a long time. Still, somehow she had hoped, just as surely as he had, that it would never come. When Blaine backed up and looked at her, not only was there overwhelming sadness in his tired eyes, but the shadow of whiskers covering his face was far darker than she'd ever seen it. He looked like he'd just come off a 5-day drunk, although she'd seen him only hours before. Gently, she took his face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, Blaine." He nodded. She gazed at him softly. "What do we need to do?" He looked so close to tears, it ripped her heart out. Slowly, he shook his head. "Can we get Dylan in and to bed?" "Sure thing." And so, as one, they went about doing what had to be done. Blaine got Dylan, Melody got their things. She followed them up the walk and then ran in front of them to get the door. Dylan wasn't even coherent as they got him to the couch where the pillow and blanket were already in place. When the child was once again fast asleep, Blaine stood, looking at his brother, and then, as she watched, the dam burst. He exhaled hard, and Melody knew. She stepped over to him and gathered him once again into her arms. They stood like that, her holding him, as minutes slipped into oblivion. They didn't matter anyway. The way it felt at the moment, the world might well have actually stopped around them. Finally, he pulled away and ran his hand down his face. "Do you want something? To drink or to eat?" she asked, surveying him with no idea what to do next. His gaze came up to hers, exhausted and empty. "A cheese sandwich sounds great." Blaine sat at her table. He'd been in this house many times, but never had he sat at her table. Something told him that now he would always remember the first time he had. He watched her move around the kitchen, collecting things for him, and in the haze of everything else, he realized just how much he had come to love her. Describing it was impossible. She simply was the very best friend he'd ever had. "All we had was Swiss cheese and white bread. It looks kind of anemic, but I hope it's not too bad." She set the plate in front of him and then gazed down at him with a worried look that hurt to see. "Do you want something to drink? Water? Juice? Milk?" Milk," he said, barely getting the word out. Melody nodded and went to the refrigerator. In moments, she was back with the milk. She set it on the table and sat down in the chair next to his. Then she pointed to his sandwich. "Eat." It was entirely possible that she would have to remind him to breathe before this night was over. Dutifully, Blaine picked up the bread and bit into it. He didn't taste it at all. As he ate slowly, she simply sat and watched. When he was almost finished, she gazed at him softly. "Do you want something else?" He shook his head. "No, I'm good, thanks." The last bite took an unbelievable amount of effort. True, bone-crushing exhaustion began to seep in. He yawned even as he tried to squelch it. When the yawn was gone, reality came back again, and he shook his head. "It's just so hard to believe. I sit here, and I think this has to be some bizarre nightmare I'm having, that I'm going to wake up, and I'll be back in our house on Palermo, and that it was all just one big nightmare." The air whooshed from his lungs, dragging the anguish up with it. What am I going to do? Then an even worse thought hit him. How am I ever going to tell Dylan? Blaine crumpled forward into his hands. This is going to kill him. Dylan knew it was bad, she said softly. Yeah, but this bad? Anger leaped from him. I should have done something to get her out of there. I knew Dave would come back. I knew he would. Blaine, you did everything you could have, and then some. But I knew he was dangerous. And so did she. She made the choice to see him again. She did, not you. You can't beat yourself up for her decisions. But I should have known not to leave her alone there. A shadow slid across Melody's face. Just be glad Dylan was here. Blaine's head jerked up, and in the next second a dagger went through his heart at the thought of what might have been had Dylan not been with her. Oh, my. Once again he crumpled into tears, and once again she took him into her arms, finally kneeling on the ground in front of him as he sobbed onto her shoulder, quaking with the unimaginable grief. They spent an hour in the kitchen, talking and crying. He told her some of the details, although Melody was sure he might never even tell her all of them. Then it was clear how drained he was and how much he needed sleep, She took his hand and led him up the stairs to the bathroom. "Get ready," she instructed at the threshold. "Take a shower, change, whatever. Take your time." Gratefully, his hand came up and his fingers traced down the side of her face. "I love you, you know that?" She laid her head into his hand. "I love you too." Then he went into the bathroom and closed the door. For the next 20 minutes, she got things ready: an extra pillow from the linen closet, her bed, an extra blanket from the hallway, and her own pallet on the floor of the living room. She knew without asking that Dylan might wake up sometime in the night and panic. Someone needed to be down there with him, and that someone was her. Then she went back upstairs just as Blaine was coming out of the bathroom, showered and exhausted. Deep attraction surged through her when the fact that he was in glasses and his bathrobe went through her. He looked like those old English guys who sat in their studies and smoked pipes, except much more heart-stopping. I got my bed ready for you." Feeling like she might do something really stupid, she turned and started for her room. "Mel." She just spun slightly and laughed at him. "Oh, come on, don't be such a drama king. I'm sleeping downstairs with Dylan. Well, not with Dylan, on the floor by Dylan." This time, he looked truly exasperated. "Mel." Pointing at him, she took his hand and pulled him to her door. "No, now, no arguing. Tonight, you sleep. Tomorrow, you can argue." "But you're being nice. I'm being nice, and it's okay. You'll live through it, I promise." At her door, she stopped and looked at him. Soft sorrow wafted over her heart. "I really am sorry." He pursed his lips together and nodded. "I know." A moment, and she pushed him across the threshold. "Now, get some sleep. If you need anything, you know where I'll be." After only a step, he stopped and gazed at her. "Thank you, Melody, for everything." It took a moment for her to get the words out. "You're welcome. Now, get some sleep." As he walked in and closed the door, she put her head down and said a quick prayer for him. She could only imagine how hard all of this was. As she headed downstairs, a thought hit her. In the living room, she realized it was nearly 2 a.m. Still, she knew them, and they would want to know. After checking on Dylan, she went into the kitchen and picked up the phone. She pulled her mother's address book out and thumbed through it quickly. When she spotted it, she breathed a sigh of thanks that her mother was so adamant about writing down absolutely everybody's information. Her hands shook as she dialed, and she had to force them to settle enough to get the numbers in. When she put the receiver to her ear, she closed her eyes and willed her heart to stop racing. A ring. 2. She was probably going to get the answering machine. "Hello?" The voice was groggy. Instantly, Melody wished she hadn't called. It was Eve, and considering AJ might be working, it was highly possible she was there alone. This was horrible news to deliver to someone who's by themselves. "Hello?" There was more fear this time. "Who is this?" Eve, hi, this is Melody. Listen, I'm sorry to call you so late." "Melody? No, that's fine. What's going on?" She sounded fully awake now. Eve, Blaine's mom got killed tonight." "Blaine's... what? Melody, are you sure?" "Yeah, him and Dylan are here at my house." She closed her eyes, again wishing she hadn't called. "I just wanted AJ to know they're okay." "AJ? Why AJ?" The story circled her head. "He called earlier. I don't know how he found out. I don't know, but he called earlier, worried about Blaine. I just wanted to let him know they're okay." "Oh, okay." Eve paused. "How's Blaine?" This exhale was hard and soul-drenching. "Dealing." "Yeah," Eve said softly. "Is there anything we can do?" "Yeah, say some prayers. I'll let you know when I know anything." "Okay." The line went silent. "Thanks, Melody. Thanks for letting me know." "Sure." When Melody curled up on the blankets in the living room floor, minutes later, She couldn't believe she didn't just collapse from the exhaustion. However, for some odd reason, sleep didn't come. Instead, she lay awake for a long time, thinking and praying. For Dylan, for Blaine, for all of them. This has been For Real, Book 3, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.